Welcome to the Rare History Channel. Top 8 Unknown History Lessons of the 20th Century. The 20th century was a time of immense global achievement but also of global unrest. It saw the fall and rise of empires, borders redivided, and nations created. It was a time when the world had a better standard of living than all human civilizations across all eras of time, but it was on the tip of a nuclear apocalypse. You all knew this, but what about the lessons that you didn't know? From one man's attempt to create better human beings through DNA to the vote of a single man deciding the fate of the entire human race, these are the history lessons that you did not know but have left their mark on the entire world. Fact number 1. The Curse of Timur. Timur, aka Tamerlane, declared himself a great Khan in the year 1369 and made it his mission to rebuild the Mongol Empire into what it was at the time of Genghis Khan. After his death, he was buried with an alleged curse on his tomb stating that whoever shall disturb it will face an invader far worse than himself. According to local lore, the curse was said to take 3 days to effect the cursed. In 1941, under the command of Joseph Stalin, Soviet anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov excavated the tomb for the purpose of recreating Timur's face. 3 days after the excavation, the Nazis executed Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union without warning. This resulted in some of the deadliest battles in human history and many Soviet defeats. Only after Joseph Stalin ordered the reburial of Timur did the tides of war change in favor of the Soviets, allowing them to gain the upper hand against Nazi Germany, push their forces west, and turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. Number 2. South African Nuclear Disarmament. In a session of the South African Parliament in 1993, President F.W. de Klerk revealed that at one point, the nation had developed a small arsenal of nuclear weapons. This confirmed the fears of many other African nations that the South African government had done so. However, in 1990, all South African nuclear warheads were dismantled in order to create international cooperation and trust, in the words of President de Klerk. This was the first time in history that a nation voluntarily dismantled its nuclear arms and one of only 4 instances in history. The other nations dismantled theirs because they could no longer keep up with the maintenance after the collapse of the Soviet Union. South Africa's decision, however, was made in order to extend an olive branch to the global community and show the nation's devotion to peace. Number 3. The Carnation Revolution. The Carnation Revolution took place on April 25, 1974, when the armed forces movement, led by General Antonio Spinola and backed by many Portuguese military members and prominent civilians, ended the Estado Novo regime in Portugal. The regime was replaced with a democratic system which restored many civil rights in Portugal. Over the course of the next 10 years, a constitution was established, and a stable two-party system was formed. One of the revolution's main triggers was a large portion of Portugal's budget being spent on fighting wars in the African colonies. After many years of fighting, the Portuguese military had become fed up with the large loss of life in an unwinnable war, thus motivating the coup. After the revolution, the new government gave independence to Portugal's colonies. Number 4. George Wallace and Arthur Bremer. George Wallace was the 45th governor of Alabama and the final independent presidential candidate to win promised electoral college votes. George Wallace was also one of the most controversial politicians in U.S. history due to his extreme segregationist views. During his third presidential campaign in 1972, he was shot by Arthur Bremer during a campaign rally. At the time of the assassination attempt, Wallace was showing positive support numbers due to his more moderate platform, but the shooting derailed his campaign. Bremer served 35 years in prison before being released on parole in 2007. Wallace returned to Alabama and served out his remaining term as governor, despite being paralyzed from the waist down. He later tried unsuccessfully to run for president again. Wallace was later elected as Alabama's governor for a final term before retiring from politics. Number 5. B-59 submarine incident. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Russian B-59 submarine was operating in the Caribbean while U.S. military forces were dropping depth charges as part of their Cuban blockade. Panicked, the captain and senior officers debated what to do. On board this B-59 was a nuclear warhead, and as the bombs fell, the submarine's captain felt it was necessary to launch the warhead. Thankfully, according to Soviet protocol, all senior officers aboard must approve any launch of a nuclear warhead. 2 of the officers voted in favor of a launch, but one senior officer named Vasily Arkhipov voted against it, thus saving the world from nuclear destruction. Number 6. Genius babies. From 1980 to 1999, over 200 babies were born using the sperm of Nobel Prize winners, high IQ individuals, and athletes. The project was founded by a Southern California tycoon named Robert K. Graham. Graham's goal was to create a better generation through the use of positive eugenics. At the time, the project was controversial, with opinions ranging from it being elitist to straight-up genocidal. Nevertheless, the effort lasted for almost 20 years, with many babies being born. Although no evidence has been brought forward to suggest that the children are above average in any way, shape, or form, largely due to the secrecy of the project, the families who have spoken about their children have described them as wonderful. Number 7. Attack of the Dead Men. In 1915, World War I was in full rage, with never-before-seen weapons and tactics being employed by both sides of the conflict. According to one story, during a German offensive on the Russian fort of Osowiec, located in modern-day Poland, the German forces employed chemical weapons on the Russians. The effects of the deadly gas on the Russian soldiers were catastrophic, causing them to cough up blood onto their uniforms. When the Russians launched a counteroffensive, the invading German forces were horrified when they saw what appeared to be zombie-like soldiers. This resulted in the terrified German army retreating, despite having superior numbers against the Russian forces. This story, although virtually unknown in the West, is a symbol of Russian military power and is commonly told and taught in Russia. Number 8. The Wall Street Putsch. The months between the election and inauguration of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a time when American democracy hung in the balance. This was the Great Depression, and President Roosevelt's plan to minimize its effects angered legislators on both the left and the right. The left argued that he hadn't gone far enough, while the right believed that the new president's policies were evidence that he was a socialist or communist, with some even going so far as to say that due to his Dutch descent, Roosevelt was a Jew and a part of a larger Jewish plot. This led to many calling for an end to American democracy and the institution of a communist or fascist regime. These calls were taken a step further by a group of right-wing financiers. They hoped to convince President Roosevelt to step down and leave a military-led fascist government in his place. This group was able to gather millions in funds and also stockpile weapons in preparation for their new government. Their plan was derailed when they approached former Marine General Smedley Darlington Butler to lead their forces. Instead of joining the conspiracy, Butler reported the conspirators to Congress, recognizing them as traitors, thus putting an end to their plot.